Good evening. This is the market update segment on Business Today. And to discuss today's topics, we have with us Malik, Nazahim, an associate of Frontier Research. Good evening and welcome to the program.
Good evening, Prashant.
All right. So let's start off with a bit about the financial crisis in the US. And let's start off with a discussion on the US debt ceiling and its effect.
Yes. So it's up until now, it's not exactly a financial crisis yet,
Okay.
but it could turn out to be a crisis situation in the US. So to talk about the debt ceiling, we will need to look at the borrowing of the US federal government.
Mm-hmm.
So usually the federal government has a borrowing limit. So what they do is they have revenue and they have expenditure.
Mm.
So this revenue, they get it from tax and other various measures, and they generate revenue. And when it comes to expenditure, they have higher expenditure. So they need to finance this excess expenditure with debt.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens is, generally every year the government sells securities, and they finance. They get money for the securities, and they finance their projects.
Okay.
And since 1960 onwards, right, for 6 to 7 decades, this debt ceiling limit, the borrowing limit, or the debt ceiling as you call it, has been changed, and it has been moved higher when you take a look at the trend. But what happens now is the Congress, which has a higher proportion of the opposition political party, is saying that we will not allow you to raise the debt limit or the borrowing limit further.
Mm-hmm.
So now we are in a stalemate position where it's increasing speculation on the US government and the operations as well. So currently the debt limit is around $31.2 trillion, and it was reached in January. So once it was reached, Janet Yellen, the Secretary for Treasury, called out on the US government and asked them to make a move and at least increase the debt limit or do something, because there could be catastrophic issues in the future.
Right.
But the government couldn't do that as soon as Janet Yellen started saying her concerns to the public through public media as well. And what happened after that was they introduced some extraordinary measures which they call to manage the liquidity shortage that the government has.
Right.
But what happens is we are closer to a date called the X date. The X date comes in when the US government doesn't have enough money to spend.
Okay.
So where do they spend this money? For medical care, for their social security services, for military operations, and for pension payments. So if the government fails to make such a payment without liquid dollars,
Mm-hmm.
it could push the economy into a contraction. So there could be a recession in the US government, and also there could be high unemployment rates again, and the stock markets also could drop significantly. And another thing about US securities are that they are usually the trademark for very high safety assets. Okay. Right? The US government, a lot of countries trust the US government and their financial operations.
Mm.
But when such a thing happens, when US defaults on its debt, that when it fails to pay the debt, what happens is when it fails to pay the credit, what happens is that they lose their credibility in the financial market. So we could see that even in the interest rates and the yield rates in the markets, that investors are demanding for more rates, and they're asking to reduce prices. So you could see it in the yield rate, which is increasing.
Mm-hmm.
So another thing is that when interest rates continues to increase, it affects the economy and the lending operations on a broader perspective.
Okay.
So this is the main thing that's happening with the debt ceiling, and even now Joe Biden has not gone to the G7's meeting in Japan because he has to stay in the US and find a solution to this. So what the Republicans, so previously Trump was a Republican president, so what the Republicans in the Congress are saying is that they would allow to increase around $1.2 trillion as the borrowing limit, so it could go around to 32 or 33 trillion dollars, but they are asking the government to cut expenses by around $4 trillion. So this is Biden is very against this, and him and the Democrats, because it's against their general national policy, so it could affect them a lot in upcoming elections as well. So it's more like a political tug of war that's there, and they haven't found a resolution yet. So big corporate CEOs and bank presidents are not happy with what's developing in the US with regards to the debt ceiling.
Right. So can we have an update on the global banking sector as well?
Yes. So last time when we met, we spoke about the banking collapse in the US. Right, and on our update is that as we expected, it did not trickle into the global economy because these banks were regional banks and their scale was much smaller than the collapse of the 2008 during the 2008 global financial crisis. So these three banks, what had happened is that larger banks had acquired them, and also the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation was swift enough to take necessary measures, and it has been pretty successful since then. Also, they have brought in some proposals to increase the insured deposits, so to increase the limit for insured deposits, so that bigger depositors, larger depositors would also be saved if there is such a liquidity crunch also.
Okay. Now, what does having the elections and all of that in the emerging markets, what is that relationship, the connection? How does that affect us?
Yes. So 2023 in terms of electing leaders is a really important scenario or scene for the global economy.
Okay.
So when you take a look at some countries such as Pakistan, Nigeria, and Turkey, and also Thailand, so and Argentina. So these 5 countries are electing their leaders in this year. So all these 5 countries globally are economically they are really strong powerhouses. So and it can change a lot of perspectives in the global market. So when we look at Turkey, right? So Erdogan has been the president or the leader of the country for around more than 15 years, right? For a long time he has been the president of Turkey, and Turkey is a really important country when it comes to the global economy and the European economy and also the Middle East region.
Right.
So this year in the election, Erdogan failed to earn a majority vote share. So now the election is going to the second round. So this could be very, very important for countries that look upon Turkey. So even when you take the Sri Lankan economy, we export tea to Turkey. So it could affect Erdogan is a more far right politician, so it could affect if Kemal, who is competing with him, wins the election, there could be some changes in the policies, and Turkey could go into a reform era, and there could be drastic changes as well. We could expect that as well. When you look at Nigeria, also there is a dispute when it comes to electing their leader. The elections finished in February, but still there is a court case that is going on. So when you take the African region, Nigeria is an important economy. It could be the largest as well. It ranks on the top of the African region. And also Thailand, you would have known that a young group of politicians have won their general election.
Okay.
So that also is really significant, and it could turn Thailand towards a reform era.
Okay, right. Now, when it comes to global developments on debt restructuring, what is really an update in Ghana? What's happening there, and also Zambia as well?
Yes, so as we all know, Sri Lanka has reached an IMF deal, and we are starting our talks regarding the debt restructuring. So we have to look upon Ghana, Suriname and Zambia to see how their debt restructuring is developing as well, because all 4 countries literally defaulted in a small period of time, between a small period of time. So today and this week, Suriname reached into a debt restructuring deal, and Ghana has reached an agreement with the IMF for a loan for 2 to 3 years. And also Zambia is a country that defaulted first in this era, as we call it. So Zambia has actually failed to reach a debt restructuring deal yet. So this also shows us that the debt restructuring talks sometimes could take a longer time of period. But what we need to focus is that who are Zambia's creditors, right? And we see that China is up the list. So China has a significant proportion of Zambia's debt, and analysts and experts are pointing their fingers at China for not helping Zambia come out with a restructuring deal. Whereas for Suriname and Ghana, it's not, even for Sri Lanka, China is not a really significant lender when it comes to that.
Okay. Now, just for additional knowledge, what are some of the reasons that governments of such countries fall into default? What is the reason they default?
Usually it comes with short-sighted policies, and also when it comes to short-sighted policies, you could see that the 5-year election cycles, right? So every 5 years you need to get elected again. So your policies also would focus on more on a personal view, if I would say, more on expense rather than investments. So these expenditure, these spending that they increase, does it yield enough return to the country? So that is really important, and these policies are much short-sighted when you take a look, not only in Sri Lanka, when you take a look at the other South Asian countries, or all these debt stress countries, the politics has been really bad. So that's really important to have a really good government with long-term policies, with firm policies, and sometimes you'll have to make unpopular policies as well. So that is all important when it comes to using the money you have. And also when you take a look at debt, right? From where do you get this debt, and what are the agreements that you agree on, and all of these are really important, because there is hidden debts, and it's a very deep area to look into, and that is also important.
Okay. Now, coming back to the topic of Turkey, you mentioned that there might be some significant changes with the change in presidency, and there might be some change in policies, but how bad or how strong do you think that will affect Sri Lanka especially?
Not significant, not really significant, but it could be a start of an era.
Okay.
It could be a start of an era where these long time serving presidents are moving out. So Erdogan, Xi Jinping and Putin are some of the long serving presidents, and when you look at them, all these countries are allies, Turkey, China and Russia. So it eases their political sphere, and their operations become much more easier. But when it starts to change, these 3 economies are really significant globally.
Okay.
So that would affect globally, it will affect most of the countries with demand.
Right. Well, thank you for that update on the market. That was Malik Nazahim, an associate of Frontier Research. Thank you for being with us this evening.
Thank you.
And that winds up today's episode of Business Today. Do join us next time as well. Till then, have a good night.